record all of these and upload them to the SPIA YouTube channel. This is just for future reference or for people who can't make it to the presentation itself. Of course, if you can't make it to the presentation, if you're out there watching on the computer and you have questions, you can ask me later, but those in the room will have the benefit of being able to ask me now. If you don't mind, just so I know, just real quick, and I might forget, but could you tell me just your name real quick and like what your SPIA major is?
My name's Blake. I'm a political science and international affairs major.
Blake, okay.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a political science major.
Hey, Maddie.
I'm Lily. I'm poli-sci as well.
Lily, cool. I'm Laura, Brett.
Poli-sci.
William.
Lily.
Sterling, political science.
Sterling? And Sterling, you were at the last one of these too, weren't you? Yeah, welcome back. All right. Who among you, just curiously, and I was talking to Laura about this a little bit earlier, who among you might be interested in a career in the intelligence field? Maybe? Okay, so the people here that are possibly interested in this. That's good. We're going to be talking today mostly about federal intelligence work, and that involves a number of different agencies. We'll go over some of those in a minute. We'll delve slightly, a little bit, into the field of private intelligence, which also exists in various forms. My email address is up here in case you have any additional questions, and as I was telling Laura a moment ago too, you can also make appointments to meet with me. I think a couple of you have actually in the past through Sage, the same platform that you schedule appointments with your academic advisors. And for anybody who wants it, I always bring some of my cards that have my contact information too, just so you're aware. So I've got a few of the intelligence agency shields here. There are, in fact, 18 different intelligence agencies. That's if you count the Directorate of National Intelligence Office, which is sort of an office that oversees all of the other agencies. Traditionally, it's been described as 17 agencies, really, because those are the ones really kind of doing the groundwork. But the Directorate is also there. I'm probably aware from the news, if you've been keeping up with it, that would be the position that, if she is confirmed, that Tulsi Gabbard would be taking over. And so, but that remains to be seen. That's kind of in process. And that's something actually I should probably mention at the outset. I have worked for a federal agency. It's not one of the intelligence agencies. I work for the Federal Trade Commission in the field of antitrust. And so, in other words, either approving or disapproving of mergers and acquisitions among corporations worth more than $50 million apiece. And so, in that case, certain changes can happen in a federal agency when a presidential administration changes, especially when a presidential administration changes parties. If it changes and it's like a new president, but it's the same political party, it's more likely to stay the same. That's no guarantee, but it's more likely to stay the same. In this case, and right now, I'm sure that there are a lot of changes that are about to happen in Washington, and these agencies are already preparing for that. But just so you're aware of kind of how it works, is oftentimes a new person will come in. Say, in my case, a new federal trade commissioner gets appointed, and they get approved by the Senate, and that person comes in, and changes begin to trickle down. So that person begins to appoint people beneath them, and then those people begin to appoint people beneath them. And there's a point at which you get so far down, and this was my position, where you're not appointed by anybody. You're just hired, which is fine, but it can still affect you if you're hired for these positions. In my case, I was a low-level economic analyst working with a lot of attorneys, especially, and other economists, to help kind of examine these mergers and acquisitions. And as we changed in the time that I was in the office from a Democratic administration, which tends to be tougher on antitrust, to a Republican administration that tends to be a little bit laxer on antitrust, our budgets began to decrease. And we started seeing things like people were not going to get raises, they were going to have to lay some people off. In the end, I was able to transition out of that and into a several-year career in the finance field in South Florida. And it worked out in the end for me. And it works out for everybody, really. But it's just something to bear in mind, is that there is a little bit of volatility in working for federal agencies, especially when administrations change, or when budgets change and so forth. Just something to keep in mind. This is the list of all of the current intelligence agencies. These are the 18. Some of them you've certainly heard of. The CIA, probably the most well known. The CIA itself, actually, not technically the first, but the first really major one. It was an outgrowth of the OSS, which was a unit during World War II that was exceptionally successful in intelligence work. Just curiously, by the way, are you familiar with this famous? She died a long time ago, but a famous kind of celebrity chef named Julia Childs. She was an OSS agent before she was a chef, and worked in signals intelligence, which means interpreting things like Morse code and radio signals and stuff like that. But that changed into the CIA post World War II and into the Cold War, and then other agencies started to grow out of that. You probably heard of the NSA. You may have heard of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. They actually come here and recruit from time to time, and have hired numerous SPIA graduates in recent years. The main difference between the DIA, for instance, and the CIA or NSA is that the Defense Intelligence Agency focuses mostly on providing intelligence just to the military. Right? The CIA is kind of like, they're kind of all over everything, and as is the NSA, sometimes controversially so, but they've got a kind of, everything is plugged in everywhere. The DIA is military focused. But also, if you look through these, you'll notice that every single one of the military branches is also represented here. So for instance, Marine Corps Intelligence, there's Naval Intelligence Office, even the Space Force has its own intelligence agency within it. And so you have these different kinds of branches that work internationally. You've also got some that work domestically, because the DEA is up there, Office of National Security Intelligence is their branch. The FBI has its own intelligence branch. And then various other military intelligence corps, Office of Intelligence and Counterintelligence with the Department of Energy. By the way, why might the Department of Energy need an intelligence branch? Yeah, Laura?
I feel like if other countries try to break into our boards or whatnot to mess up the energy.
That's a big part of it. Yeah. That's a huge part of it. There's another big part of it too. I think we don't often think of it this way, but the Department of Energy is actually the department that oversees all of our nuclear weapons too. They use the military to control them, but it's the DOE that oversees that. Does anybody watch Stranger Things? Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of it has to do with the Department of Energy
Yes.
and all the weird work that they're doing. That's fictional, of course. But it's just to say that the Department of Energy does play a major role in defense as well. And with that in mind, and even though you won't see them up here because they're not intelligence agencies, I know that we have a lot of students who are interested in fields like counterterrorism and homeland security and stuff like that. Homeland security is kind of represented in various places up here, but counterterrorism and anti-human trafficking operations are actually performed by a lot of other government agencies that you might not really expect. One of them, a big one, is Department of the Treasury. Do you know why that might be? Yeah.
Human trafficking is extremely lucrative at a huge field, so tracking from a treasury and from an economic standpoint could help.
Yeah, and in fact, when I was in DC last month, I met with a SPIA graduate. She graduated about 20 years ago, but she works with the Department of Treasury now in anti-human trafficking and counterterrorism. And she was saying that her role and the role of her office that she works in is to trace like financial transfers, because if they can follow the money, they can find the people behind it, you know. Another organization you might least expect is the Postal Service, but it's for the same reason. There are actually like Postal Service Special Forces operations that can arrest people based on kind of where mail is happening, but also, and this is important, what they call wire fraud. Meaning, you know, people who are kind of like skimming credit card transactions, or like, you know, taking things out of bank transactions internationally or otherwise. And so it's all just to say, like, some of these organizations really have their hands in things that you wouldn't expect. And that includes the Defense Intelligence Agency. I know when their recruiters were here relatively recently, they were talking about how they have a whole team that's devoted to issues of climate change and weather research, because of the way that those issues not only affect geopolitics, but also how they can affect even like battlefield conditions on any given day. And so they need meteorologists to be studying that sort of thing. So a whole bunch of options, as you can see. Here, basically, I've listed the major different types of intelligence gathering that exist. The most famous one, human intelligence. In a very unrealistic sense, this would be James Bond. There's no point to being the most famous spy in the world. You don't want to be the most famous spy in the world. The point of being in espionage is to be secretive. But human intelligence definitely exists. Within the CIA, that's called the clandestine service. It's an extraordinarily dangerous job. Extraordinarily dangerous job. And have a little bit more on that in a moment. The good news is you don't have to be involved in human intelligence to be involved in intelligence. And in fact, in an increasingly interconnected world, that gets easier and easier to do. Lots of our intelligence analysts actually work somewhere in the DC area, if not elsewhere within the United States, looking around on the internet, using signals intelligence operations to look at radio waves, even Bluetooth signals. You know, there's a lot of information that can be gleaned just through computers, phone lines, and so forth. And so, and everybody calls them these things: HUMINT, SIGINT, IMINT, right, or IMINT, intelligence gathered via imagery. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, that is their specialty. It used to be called National Imagery and Mapping Agency, and it was a branch of the CIA, but they branched off into their own group, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And in recent years, just a couple of years ago, about 2.5 years ago now, their work became quite well known. And I don't know if you remember this, but January and February of 2022, the United States started saying Russia is about to invade Ukraine. We know they're going to do it. They're saying that they're not, but we know they're going to do it. And it was like they broadcast this on the news, you know, which is highly unusual to use intelligence gathering resources and then put it on the news. How did we know they were going to invade Ukraine? Yeah.
Satellite imagery.
Yes, satellite imagery showed the troop buildup, you know, along the Ukrainian border. And they could show it very clearly. I'm sure you know by now, like, satellite imagery can get very detailed at this point. I mean, you're talking about satellites that can read license plates on cars and stuff. You know, it's really incredible. Why do you think they put it on the news?
Hopeful that it'll stop it, like, cause less, I'm gonna forget the word I was gonna say, but it's less secretive, so hopefully stopping the surprise of it, causing them to retreat.
Potentially, yeah, because Russia definitely wanted it to be a surprise. It also sent another kind of like subtle message to Russia that was like, we know what you're up to. You know, like, you're not gonna pull anything over on the rest of us. 5 different countries in the world that we refer to as the Five Eyes. You heard of this before? Can anybody name the 5?
U.S., Australia, England, France. I don't know the 5th.
I could be wrong. I think it's Canada.
Okay.
Yeah, but yes, basically it's 5 countries who share their signals intelligence and imagery intelligence as well. There is, in fact, and this is, you can look this up online, there's a small CIA base right in the middle of Australia. And the reason that it's there, effectively, even though the US doesn't talk about it much, is because it can communicate with satellites from a location that a lot of other US bases can't, you know? And because Australia is one of the Five Eyes, they agreed to like have the CIA there and kind of help them out work in tandem. So, IMINT then is one of them. Measurements and signatures intelligence often involves telemetry. You know, are you familiar with that word at all? So it basically in the most practical use, and this isn't the only way you could use it, but telemetry might be used to triangulate cell phone signals to determine where someone is, or satellite signals. And so it helps with tracking things like troop movements, or just enemy movements generally, tracking in terms of espionage and so forth. And then, this is one of the most interesting ones to me, it's much more recent, open source intelligence, which is to say, intelligence to which all of us have access. Has anybody had a class or have a class with Marianne Gallagher? Not yet? You might at some point. She's really cool if you do. But I know that she brought a guest in last year who, and I think they met in this room, it was like a special presentation, who said, I'm going to give you a quick assignment. Your assignment is to tell me, to the best of your ability, where is Kirby Smart right now? So just thinking about it, we're not going to do that, but thinking about it, like, how would you figure that out? Open your laptop or your phone. What is it, Laura?
Social media.
Social media, definitely. That's a good place to look. Because they might be announcing where he is.
News articles that maybe you're following a day in his life.
Yeah. Might use news articles.
His connections.
His connections, yeah. You could look at people he's connected to, for instance, on social media. They might be mentioning it. He's a well-known guy. People might be taking selfies with him someplace. He might be giving a news conference of some kind, right? We can also just think in terms of practical odds. I mean, it's a Monday afternoon, late in the football season. My guess is that he's out at the practice fields, you know, or someplace close by, but I don't know that, and there are certainly ways that we could look online. Yeah, Maddie?
Oh, I heard.
Oh, I thought you were raising your hand. No, that's okay. But that's kind of how you would use open source intelligence to learn about different things. And of course, if you're trying to learn about stuff like geopolitical issues, news articles are great. And that's part of the value too in learning to speak and read other languages, because other newspapers around the world might be covering things that the news in the United States is not, for various reasons. You know, there are a number of conflicts happening in the world right now. Of course, there's Ukraine and the invasion there. There's the issue in Gaza, between Gaza and Israel's invasion of Gaza, looking for Hamas. There are some other news stories like unrest in Myanmar, formerly Burma, happening right now. In recent years, although it kind of gets better and worse from time to time, there's been a lot of unrest in Haiti. You know, we don't see as much in the news, though, as frequently stuff about Haiti and Myanmar. Why do you think that is?
They're not really countries on the
and that's like, that's kind of the gist of it more than anything else, is that there are more, for one thing, there are more people in between Ukraine and Russia who have immigrated to the United States over time. Many people with ties here in the U.S. to Israel and Gaza, fewer people with ties to Haiti and Burma or Myanmar. And also because the U.S. doesn't necessarily consider those to be as great of like security concerns, right? Those conflicts are less likely to affect us in direct ways. The United States keeps kind of threatening to get more involved in Gaza. Of course, we're sending more and more weapons, at least for now, into Ukraine. Those are kind of like direct security issues. And so our news reflects that, which is why speaking French could be valuable to read news stories coming out of Haiti, because we still need to know what's going on there. So again, just open source intelligence can be very valuable and something we can all do. I think it's important to mention this about human intelligence. This is the issue of traditional spying and so forth. Spies are not protected by the Geneva Conventions. The reason for that is that as a spy, on some level, you're acting as a soldier. Maybe not a soldier like on a battlefield, but you're a soldier who's pretending that you're not a soldier. And that's kind of the whole point. And only soldiers really who are openly soldiers are protected by the Geneva Conventions. And part of what the Geneva Conventions dictate is that, if you're a soldier in uniform and you get taken as a prisoner of war, if it's another country that has signed on to those conventions, they're supposed to treat you at least humanely well, The U.S. in general, if you look back at our history of how we treat our own prisoners of war, is, at least during, like, say, World War II, and also to some extent during even Vietnam, was not terrible. I mean, it's not great, but like a lot of German soldiers who were taken during World War II ended up settling in the United States permanently after the war, because they came here, they worked on farms while they were here, they met other Americans and so forth, and the reason that the United States and other signatories to the Geneva Conventions do this is because we hope that other countries won't treat our soldiers badly when they're taken. It's designed to be a reciprocal thing. Of course, there are countries that have not signed on to it, and those can end up in tragic situations. But again, because spies are effectively soldiers who are pretending not to be soldiers, they don't have those protections. And so if you're taken as a spy, you can be treated potentially very poorly. That's part of what makes this work so dangerous. You're also a spy. As a spy, you're someone who, if you're found out, you are a high value prisoner, very high value. And so it's just to say that I know I mentioned James Bond earlier, but I think other movies do it too, sometimes glamorize the work of espionage in ways that may be more or less realistic than reality, but just know what you're getting into, is all I'm saying. Open source intelligence. I've listed 3 private, for-profit or news agencies and research organizations simply as examples that use open source intelligence simply because they don't have other means to do intelligence, and yet they're very effective at what they do. Has anybody heard of Bellingcat? You have?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I'm a PR major as well, so.
Oh, cool. Can you tell us anything about Bellingcat?
Not as much, but like just references my professors have made to it. But
Okay.
I've heard the name before. That's not
Yeah.
funny.
That's cool. Bellingcat is incredible. It's a journalistic company, and yeah, you can look them up online very easily. But they use open source intelligence to do these like just incredible investigations where, say like some image online is going viral, and they're like, and somebody's saying, oh, this is an image that is from the war in Ukraine or something like that, Bellingcat will figure out, just based on like what's in the background, exactly where the photo was taken. They look for things like time signatures and like angle of the sun and stuff like that to figure out exactly what time of the year it was taken. They can tell you, like, is this accurate or not, And you're probably familiar with some of these news stories or these fact check stories where they'll say, like, people are, showing this one image and saying that it happened a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it happened in a completely different part of the world at a completely different time, And Bellingcat does a lot of that. But they've also done some other really like interesting work, including exposing actual Russian spies in the U.S. Just using things like travel documents and flight histories and stuff. But they are experts, at getting into the details, getting into the weeds, and exposing all kinds of things that you might not expect. BSI, British Standards Institution, we actually offer some internships with them. And so if you're interested in working with one of these agencies, they provide major corporations with supply chain, import-export type data. So for instance, if Coca-Cola, major international company, they need to ship some products from the United States to Norway. Coca-Cola needs to know things like, what are the export laws to the EU out of the United States? What are import laws in Norway like? But also things like, are there political situations that could jeopardize any of this? What kind of a shipping route are you going to need to take in order to, avoid things like piracy? What kinds of weather and climate data might they need to know? How much of a risk is this? Because it's going to be a lot of money on any given ship. BSI can provide all of that. The internship that we offer with them is a remote internship, so you just do it from your computer. And if you ever want to talk more about the nature of that internship, how it pays and that sort of thing, just let me know. But I also just mentioned the New York Times as an example, that lots of news organizations these days use open source intelligence all the time. We're all kind of like chronically online at this point, whether for good or bad. We're just kind of always there, and we can use things like our phones to take videos. People used to talk about like the potential dangers of the surveillance state and what's that going to be like, and oftentimes that was portrayed as cameras up on these poles or stuff, and watching as as we drive by, traffic cams and stuff like that. When in reality, we've all got cameras in our pockets 24/7, and so both forms exist, but that one certainly does as well. So, how do you end up getting one of these jobs? The best way to prepare for interviews with organizations like these, and with the State Department, if you're interested in working in the Foreign Service, is to be familiar with current affairs. The advice that was given to me when I was in college for basically applying for any type of government job or think tank job or so forth, is that a good magazine to read is The Economist. And part of the reason is that, like I was talking about earlier, how so many of our news organizations might focus on like certain areas of the world, but maybe not all areas of the world, and yet The Economist actually does kind of focus on them all. It will cover all kinds of things, including issues that we might not be exposed to under certain like American or British news sites, and so it's a good thing to be familiar with. Notify your friends, relatives, and colleagues. This is especially important in the intelligence agencies because they're going to get phone calls. The background check for a lot of the intelligence agencies is pretty intense. In fact, it can take a long time. It can often take up to a year, sometimes even longer to perform all of it. You will also have to fill out a long form in order to apply. I know that the background check form that you fill out for the CIA is currently around 130 pages. And so give yourself a couple days to work on that. And they're going to ask you all kinds of questions about your family, your friends. Did you ever do a study abroad program? If so, what did you do? Who did you know? Things like that. And they're going to contact those people. And so just as a courtesy, you might say, hey, mom, dad, I'm applying to the CIA. They might call you, and they might ask some questions, as well as close friends and relatives. They may not try to call everybody in those 130 pages, but some will receive calls, and so it's good to let them know. And 3, and this is kind of a weird one, but don't connect to those agencies or any of the intelligence agencies on social media. Yes, the CIA has an Instagram account. It's mostly just for it's for PR, it's for, these, and maybe to an extent for recruiting purposes also, that they just need to have something out there, and that's all fine, but they don't want you to be able to demonstrate that you have any connection to them in any way. And so it's really important that you kind of cut contacts in every way possible. So just something to keep in mind. I already mentioned the thing about be prepared for a long time to pass. That's just because of the background check. And the federal government can be a little slow too. You might have to take a polygraph at some point, where they strap the wires around you and ask you questions. Those are not perfect in terms of what they measure. They've been kind of controversial in the past, but in some cases it's the best tool that they have, and so they'll use whatever they've got. And then on a federal resume, and I would include any of the federal agencies that I mentioned, the 18 that I mentioned early on, be sure to list every single job that you've ever had, as long as it was an official job. I mean, if you babysat for a neighbor for $20 one night, that's not a big deal. But anything where you actually got a paycheck, be sure to list that, because they're gonna look through your background and they're gonna find out where you've worked. And if they find some place that you spent a summer working at Stone Cold Creamery and you didn't list it, they're gonna get suspicious. They're gonna say well, why didn't you list this, and think that that's possibly some kind of a red flag. That's one difference really between a federal agency resume and a private agency resume, because in the private world, typically you kind of narrow it down a bit more. You might include summer jobs if you don't have other experience, because at that point you're applying for entry-level stuff. But as you get further in your career, you'll probably start cutting those out, But anytime you're applying for a federal position, you always want to include it. So that's something to keep in mind. The interviews can be pretty extensive, so just be prepared. And then some information just on where to look. USAjobs.gov is a good place to start. That's a job board that includes most jobs within the federal government, not all. You can also certainly look at particular agency websites. The CIA likes to list a lot of its own listings on its site. They're pretty easy to access, actually. You can take a look at them there. If you're wondering about potential internships with these places, by now it's probably too late to apply for the coming summer at them, again, just because of those background checks. But if you wanted to start looking for something maybe in the fall or the following summer, now could be a good time to start giving it a shot. And just check it out, take a look around. Does anybody watch Archer? Maybe.
I know it.
Yeah, it's just a silly cartoon about spies, and so I wanted to include him up here. But that's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions? No? Anything at all? About life? Okay, well, that's totally fine. As I said, I've got cards. If you want to take one, please feel free. It's got all my contact information. And you can always make an appointment to to meet with me, and we can talk more, both about BSI, but other internships too. And we can always talk about internships that have nothing to do with the intelligence world as well, because we've got a lot of those. And I have a lot of information about how to find all kinds of internships. So anything that interests you. I often tell students, and I think it's worth mentioning here, one of the most valuable things you can learn from an internship is what you don't want to do with the rest of your life. And an internship can be a good way to do that because you only have to do it for a few months and then it's over. And then you're like, yeah, I don't want to do that. And so, you know, if you get an internship and you happen not to enjoy it, that's a valuable experience. Go ahead and do it now. Yeah,
I
Laura.
have a quick question. You
Sure.
know, money's so important. Do intelligence jobs pay more than like a typical government job or like private sector?
The short answer is no. they don't. If you look at usajobs.gov or CIA.gov or different sites, they will show you generally what kind of like salary ranges are. Typically those are starting salary ranges. They oftentimes federal agencies don't take into account location and cost of living. That's not to say, when I say that, that's not to say that they are low paying jobs. It's just to say that I wouldn't say that they're better paying than other jobs necessarily. Which is something I think especially to keep in mind in terms of like doing human work. Because you're doing an extremely dangerous job, but doing it as a government employee. In those cases, in many cases, you know, spies will end up getting a job in a foreign country and just working there. And so in that case, you might have a sort of double salary happening, you know, but at the same time, it's not going to make you rich. That I know that a lot of what the CIA and I'm sure other agencies want is really more than anything just a dead serious dedication to the United States, the well-being of the United States, and that means like a willingness to sacrifice everything, you know. And because those are the types of people that go into those jobs, you know, they don't have to offer enormous paychecks. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Do bear in mind a background in one of these fields could be parlayed into a private industry job that could pay a lot of money down the road, and so it could be an investment.
That's good.
Yeah.